Feeling good?
This
Clear?
question, sorry,
Yes, actually, go ahead.
the 50 across 5 districts, that is per, what is that, per
Total.
total? Okay.
Yeah. It doesn't quite work out exactly as 10 teachers per coach, because, we're talking about schools, but we're actually gonna look at that breakdown and we're gonna start talking. We're also still getting some information to know for sure what staffing looks like this coming school year, but that's a rough breakdown. You yourself are not coaching 50 teachers.
Ashley's like, I need a new job.
That's a really fair question.
I will say, originally the proposal was for K1 and 2, and I learned a hard lesson that rural does not mean small. And when you add up the K1 and 2 teachers, there's more than 80 of them. And the funding just wasn't there, even with Walton wasn't willing to fund that many teachers. So we had to scale it back to just kindergarten and first grade teachers. So if you hear any of the superintendents or anybody mention, oh, I thought it was K1 and 2, that's where that comes from. That's where that comes from. So it's just kindergarten and first grade teachers.
So here's a breakdown. This might be your first introduction to the makeup of Phelps County schools, which is great. This is also why I gave you the PDF so that you have these as reference documents, not just, what I'm sharing on the screen. But these are the 5 districts that exist in Phelps County that will be supporting St. James, Rolla, Newburgh, Dent Phelps, and Phelps. You can even just see by the makeup of teachers that these districts vary in size. They also vary, and you'll see a little bit more about this on a slide in about 2 slides from here. Some of these districts have more than one school, and for some of these, district and school are one and the same. So, for example, in Newburgh has one K, they might even just be K8. Some of them are K12, some are K8. In Newburgh, the superintendent is not the same thing as the principal, but I am pretty sure in Phelps, the superintendent and the principal are the same person. So when we're talking about rural, like it is technically its own district, but that district only has one school. So like, as you know, we're still getting final data about number of teachers per grade level as we head into this school year. And then you see the state of the curriculum across these districts. We know there are some districts that are making shifts. At present, we don't know what those shifts are. Those are a lot of questions that we have for superintendents over the next 2 weeks to try to see what final decisions were made. And we know that most of their primary teachers have been letters trained. We're going to try to get even more in-depth information about exactly who and how many in each district really have gone through that training. As we're beginning to make sense of the districts and the teachers and the materials, I want to just stop for questions here before I keep throwing data at you. All right. We're gonna keep trucking through. So we gave you the list of the schools, and here's geographically actually where they are. So Monica spent some time in Google Maps and created this beautiful visual for us. But you can see, as like we start up here, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but St. James, this is the school district. And then you come down here, Rolla has 3 elementary schools. A little further down the road is Newburgh. And then we get Phelps and Dent Phelps. While this looks like it's really far away, the furthest school is what looks like at most a 35-minute drive from Rolla. Rolla is kind of the main hub. It's the largest city in the area. It's likely where we'll stay. It's where most hotels are, restaurants, infrastructure. So relatively centrally located. We're not talking about huge driving distances between schools, or, nearest reasonable hotel accommodation.
Kim, what I would say is and John, you probably know this more, like it is a distance from St. Louis, which is probably the nearest airport.
Yeah.
And
That's
then
right.
once you're in Rolla, though, I was like mapping it. I'm like, these schools aren't that, I mean, it's rural, but like they're not that far apart. The furthest apart is 35 minutes south.
Yeah.
That's right.
There is the drive-in from St. Louis, like, I think most of us, if not all of us, have to fly. And so there is some travel from the airport. So let's get down to like kids. Who are the kids? Who are the people that are part of this? So I'm gonna give us 2 minutes to take this in. It's a lot of numbers and I don't want to just read off this slide to you. And then we're gonna talk about, what does this tell us? What questions do we have? What would be more helpful? And then John and I can narrate over kind of like what data is easy to find and how have we been learning that Missouri is not necessarily tracking their data.
What does the asterisk mean again? Is that 0, or does that mean that the population is too small to create a percentage?
So it looks like there's an absence, or what's leading me to believe is like, because there is a 0.9 that was reported, that it's like below 0.5% is the cutoff, or just like not existent. We're gonna see a lot of asterisks show up in data today. All right, so this is where like I want us to start coming off mute. I know we've been throwing so much at you. I want to start hearing some reactions. Like, what does this data tell us? What are some conclusions we are initially starting to draw? We do not have the whole picture. And what questions is this raising for you? Just reactions.
My brain is just wanting to unpack some of the special education numbers, like who is being identified. I noticed in Dent Phillips with 98% of the population identifying as white, they have the lowest special education numbers. I just find that interesting. Whereas with like the highest ML and Hispanic population, you start to see it like go up. And I'm just curious to unpack those.
Thanks, Casey.
So I think given the context John gave us and about, or you and Kim, you and John gave the data where kids are reading, and then the demographic information, it is making me think about receptivity like within the schools of change and that type of dynamic. So it's kind of making me think about like, you know, what work has been done to kind of lay that groundwork for teachers to change practices.
Yep. And we're gonna look at some district by data here in a minute too.
To Ashley's point, the thing that's coming up for me is what's the motivation for people to make change? If what the district has been support, I'm sorry, I unmuted the wrong thing.
No, you're good.
My phone doesn't give me the feedback. If what the district has been, I'm sorry, if what the state has been supporting has been training and not application, the question that came up when John was naming that was, is there a level of reporting up to the district or how to the state, I'm sorry, or how is the state's mandates around specific numbers of proficiency that need to be reached impacting the district's motivation to do well at ensuring that students are reading, right? And so that's the thing that came up for me as Ashley was talking in terms of has the ground been laid? Because to come in and do coaching, and I'm glad that it's a 2-year engagement, because it gives us time to help lay some of the groundwork that's going to be needed, and from a change management point of view, unfreeze the ground, if you will, right? But that's the thing that's hitting me. It's always like, what's the number that folks are trying to reach? And I'm also thinking, I will interject that I know that I'm subbing in something that we are working to up in the current district that we're working in, right? In St. Louis, there not being a number that we're trying to reach, but we're doing all these efforts. The question becomes, in service of what? And so I know if that's not existing here, that may be something that may be happening specifically in these smaller rural spaces, of in service of what number, like where are we actually trying, what are the metrics? Because I know data is a part of what we're doing, but where are those metrics going to be, and how are we going to move people's practices from doing for the feel good to feeling good when we move the number?
There is a lot of work that we will need to do to shift the mindset that meeting where the state is enough. Like, that's not the bar. And that's a mindset, that's mindset work that we're gonna need to do with the community. I mean, John showed us, right? 58% of the state is below basic, below meeting expectations. So like, you do the inverse, so 42% of students are meeting at least basic expectations. That's not advanced proficiency, right? 42 is not enough. That's not the bar. But we get into these bureaucratic systems, whether you're in a state with school grades or, what is the mark for keeping your school open? Like, we have to shift that, like, it's not okay in any context that only 42% of our children are proficient readers. And we will look at some of that data, some of the 3rd grade specific data by county here in a couple of slides. I'm curious if anybody had a reaction to the free and reduced lunch data along the bottom.
Yes.
Come on,
It's
say more.
it's not that high. Like, if you think of like, go think of a district you've worked with recently and go look up their free and reduced lunch. Like, a lot of, right? They're at 75%, 90%, right? So it's not that high.
Speaking for myself, all of my background is in Title I schools and in Title I districts and working with a Title I population. That's not what this is. And so as we are building our schema and our collective consciousness about like this community, it's an important thing to keep, in context. There is a population that is, is in poverty, is receiving, assistance, but it is not as high as we might be accustomed to working with. All right, so we're going to come back to this data, but keep this in mind as we start to unpack the community that we're serving. So here's that 3rd grade literacy data. Let me orient you to the slide, and then I'm going to let us, make some decisions. So the key is down at the bottom. So below basic is the very light blue basic proficiency, proficient, and advanced. John, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the below basic is like the state number that you talked about earlier, like that's where, like this, the gray bar in this, I believe, is what they consider.
It's basic and below
So it
basic.
is basic and below basic. Okay,
Mhm,
thank
yeah.
you. That's helpful.
Mhm.
Trying to interpret dashboards on the Missouri DESE website. But so for reference at the top, this is the state data. So 28.9 per student, 28.9% of students performing below basic on the third grade literacy assessment, 28.8 at basic, 25.2 at proficient, 17.2 at advanced. And then you see what those numbers look like for each of the districts. The caveat up here, this is from 2022-23. This is not this past school year's data. That data is not available on the DESE website yet. So especially those of you who might on another screen have up the demographic information and have this information, what other questions are starting to arise?
And the asterisks here mean it's too small
Too small of
A
a
number
population.
to report on it. And
They
say like,
suppress the, yep, they suppress the data to protect small populations. So like when we're talking about Newburgh, Dent Phelps, and Phelps R3, these are districts where the district and the school are one and the same. So we may be talking about single digits of students that are making up the district's performance in some of those outer bands that aren't reported. And so they just actually numerically are too small to report. Latricia, I see you shaking your head. What are you shaking your head at?
Baby, I need you to know this Newberg and Dent Phelps is killing me softly. I mean, killing me softly. That's it. Like, whew.
Right, this is their third grade literacy data. They don't have, Dent Phelps does not have enough students performing proficient or advanced in third grade to report.
And this is that inversion, right? Like that I often talk to folks about, right? Like when they're like, well, you know, we had growth to 11% proficient. That's good because 89% are not. And that's what this is showing, right? Like that piece that you heard me talk about earlier around like in service of what. And I love that you said the state bar is never going is not enough. It has to be beyond that. Go ahead, Monica.
no, I'm just making connection. I'm like, yes, that this is all. And I'm also thinking these schools like Newburgh, Dent Phelps, like like it's one class probably of students. So you're talking like 20 students. And just like how few, like one student in that district might be proficient or advanced. And it's just, yeah. Kim and I talked yesterday about how, what a difference one teacher makes. If like that's the only option you have for your district.
So I'm curious, when you take a look at the demographic data, especially around free and reduced lunch, or even just the racial demographics of communities like Newburgh and Dent Phelps, what's the relationship to their student performance? Or how is it challenging an assumption that we tend to make?
Yeah, I think one thing that I'm seeing is that the Dent Phelps special education, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing. I might be looking at the wrong thing.
Okay.
But I think it does challenge the assumption of the demographic of like Hispanic kids or Black kids or the kids, children of color are often the ones, you know, that perform at a lower amount. But I think this does speak to teacher ability and their ability to, or and then instructional materials and all that thing. So it does speak to what our teachers doing in the classroom, and then why our kids not performing at the level that they should be performing at. So I think that this really does bring home that point, especially to this, because there are so little students, and one student does have the power to tip the scale one way or the other.
In Dent Phelps, I pulled this slide back up, 98% of the students are white. It is the lowest representation of students with thinking and learning differences. And this, I mean, Rolla together would be a little bit different, but it is coming in third in terms of the lowest percentage of free and reduced lunch. Yet, this is what our data looks like. The babies cannot read.
Can I call in real quick? Learning and thinking differences is not synonymous with disabilities.
Sure.
I'm teaching a course right now on this for TNTP at large. So like anytime we have the opportunity to highlight, we can't actually quantify who has a learning and thinking difference. We can quantify a designated disability. But I do think all of this is interesting, and it's making me wonder, with such small populations of teachers and students, about like John Hattie's research around collective teacher efficacy and like what we can do to build the belief that we can impact these things through coaching. And yeah, just like how we can center that like idea of collective efficacy in the process of building them up.
I think it does, this might sound funny, but it does make me excited about the changes we can make, looking at this data about the impact we can have, because I think we can have some really amazing impact. If we think about, this is maybe just one classroom. And so by the work that we do, the impact that we can have can be really great. And so although the data isn't very good right now, I do think that with our work, we can make it a lot better.
Tons of opportunity. And, you know, when we have access to more recent data, obviously we'll look at that too. And we aren't directly coaching in third grade, but we all know the relationship that foundational literacy has to success in literacy in later grades. I think something else that, and John, please layer in here too. One of, you know, kind of the post-project launch tasks that we're going to give is for you all to dig around more into the DESE website. There is a lot of data there, but there is data that is hard to find. And so Missouri tends to group populations. And so like they will group their free and reduced lunch, their students with disabilities, their, you know, students who are English language learners together as one population in how they report out differences. And so it is hard to disaggregate. Is there a subgroup that is more affected than not? So it's not that we don't want to dig into that. It's really hard to find. And once we have an analyst on our team, I'm really excited for them to maybe poke around a little bit more and get us some more of that information that we don't have access to. John,
That's right, Kim.
later
Yep, that's
in.
right, Kim. And the other thing I'd say here too is everybody on this team is a sleuth. And as we get into schools, we start working with teachers and we start saying, oh, well, what benchmark data do you use? Oh, can I see that benchmark data? Oh, can you share that with me? We're going to collectively be able to gather more and more data that will inform how we coach and how we report out on data, and really ultimately how we shift mindsets based on the data that we're seeing. So while we might not have all the pieces yet, we certainly will.
All right, here comes the point at which we're gonna I'm gonna orient you to some documents that are in that Google folder. This is also, if you so choose to order lunch, this would be a great time to do that. If you wanted to have enough time to arrive by your lunch break. But these are dashboards that are available on the Missouri website. I PDF'd them for each district and put them in the folder, just so that we also didn't have to do the technical orientation about how to find them. But for the next 10 minutes, we're going to spend some time just digging into other types of data that we have available about districts. So quick orientation, you're going to be able to see things like enrollment, pre-K enrollment, expenditures per pupil, mobility, rates of data about attendance, suspension. And then These are much higher level, like all grade performance bands, data around math, ELA, and science. And then on the next page, some of the educator statistics. And then where students are going. So by 180-day follow-up, they mean, 180 days after the student has graduated from college or, matriculated out of their K-12 or pre-K-12 system, where are their students? Before we release to go off camera and dig into this data by district, would love someone to come off and say, like, our project is about early literacy. Why do we care about this data? Why is it important that we look at it?
Because it has a direct correlation to literacy instruction. If kids aren't in school, you can't teach them how to read, and that goes for suspension and behaviors that come with suspension, as well as mobility. If they're moving schools throughout the state or from state to state, or they're not in attendance, they can't learn to read systemically.
Absolutely. Things like attendance, discipline, suspension, mobility, paint a picture of the community and, what else is happening. Why is the data on the next page? Why is the graduation rate data important to us, or where the 180-day follow-up?
I think that speaks to the impact. So how is it impacting kids when they experience this school system, this district, this instructional level? And what does it mean? It goes right into our North Star of like, are we giving kids social and economic mobility?
Absolutely. Connecting it back to something Alicia said earlier, it's not just about, like, it's like in service of what? Whether it's there's a number we're trying to move or we're trying to increase student proficiency in literacy, but our work isn't limited to they know how to read in first grade. It's what impact can this have? What system are we trying to disrupt long-term for students, and how does literacy play a role in that? Us having the full picture helps us better identify what we're trying to do. Okay, so for the next 10 minutes, so we're gonna come back together at 44. Read through the PDFs that are available. If you haven't yet access to the PDF of the PowerPoint that also has all this data that we've gone through, read those, order lunch if you want to, and then when we come back on, and ask everybody to come back on camera at 44, everybody be ready to share what's something you learned, what's something that is making you ask questions, or how is it building your context of this community? All right, feel free to go off camera. We'll see you guys in about 10 minutes. All right, hopefully folks are coming back on camera. So what did we notice? What are we learning? What strengths do we see? What opportunities? What questions?
I didn't quite get through my data hunt, but the lens that I was looking through was to compare what the percentage of students entering 2 or 4 year colleges were with basic or above. Like I said, I didn't finish going through, but it didn't feel surprising in the few schools that I did look at that the more students who in 3rd grade scored basic or above, the higher their college rates were. Which may not be super profound, but I was just looking for confirmation there.
I'm also guessing as you looked, you noticed that not all the reports have post-secondary data because not all of these districts have high schools, meaning those students have to travel to a different county to go to high school or to a different district to go to high school.
And that was true in Dent Phillips, like Latricia said about that data. Yeah.
I also noticed it wasn't just in literacy that their scores were low. Many times their math scores were actually lower than their reading scores.
Not a literacy specific challenge.
Something I was noticing in it, I was looking at stuff besides achievement data. Like the student to teacher ratio is really interesting in some of those schools, like 11-to-1 is very small classrooms. So that's interesting. And then I was also looking at the pay, like there's a pretty big discrepancy between especially Rolla, but Rolla and St. James pay for both teachers and administrators and like the 3 outlying smaller districts.
Yeah, I paid attention to that as well. And then also the per pupil expenditure. So St. James is higher, but Rolla is pretty on the same level with the other smaller districts, but they do seem to have like a bigger spread of basic, proficient, advanced. Though St. James is like more higher performing with they spend more money on per pupil.
Something that really struck me is I paid attention to 3-year retention rate. And overall, like solid until we look at Newburgh. And Newburgh has a very different 3-year retention rate. Their number is down in the 30s. So there's a lot of teacher mobility happening there compared to like 70s and 80s in most of the rest of the county. So I have questions about why that district specifically is so different.
Yeah, I thought about teacher retention rate too, just because I also feel like that's something that effective coaching has the ability to like grow, right? Like could have a real impact on teacher retention rate. But there is a huge discrepancy, as you mentioned.
Yeah. So I'm curious if we take a step up from looking specifically at the numbers. How is your consciousness of this district and this process, this project growing as we've started to look at this data? What are you understanding more about this community and what do you still want to know?
feel like something that's sticking out to me is to John's earlier point about a rural community doesn't necessarily mean like small. So it's like this idea that it doesn't also necessarily mean in poverty or very poor. Those things are not one and the same because we can see that across the data. But then what are the held mindsets and beliefs that are causing students to not be able to read proficiently? It's like that's still left, because I think somewhere in my head, well, I guess because the statistics generally say like if you are more affluent, you're able to do these reading proficiency things a little better, but that's not the case. So what is it?
The thing that this has helped me tremendously in terms of getting to know the people and the need, right? Like what challenge we're trying to solve for, what problem we're trying to solve for. The thing that I want to continue to know more about will be the people, specifically if there are things that will leverage us to a stronger space of traction, or if there are barriers that we need to think about overcoming. And the one that comes to mind comes from two places in the world that I've had a chance to interact with. One would be Odessa, Texas, where the great oil boom is, folks know that, yeah, I mean, my kids are going to make more money working out in the oil field. So this education thing though, right? And the other one is Dalton, Georgia, the carpet capital of the world. So folks are like, but my kids are gonna go work in these carpet factories though. So yeah, right. So that's what I mean in terms of the barriers. Are there some community things in this particular area? And I would say this as we think about the replication across the state of Missouri when it comes to rural spaces. Are there some things that folks have like a fixed mindset of, but this is what our kids are going to do anyway? And that came to mind for me when I started looking at the ACT composite scores. And I also, we were looking at like the post-secondary of where students were going and spending their time. So that's one piece. But the opposite piece is the thinking about that the community foundations that John contacted in crisscrossing Missouri will look right here at Phelps County. What do they want for their children? What is the community? What is the business community saying? This is what we need. Like, we're the people who employ these folks afterwards. This is what we need. And this is what we want, big picture. So those are the things that are sticking with me. Like, there's something behind these numbers. So what are the things that will leverage us to a stronger space of traction? What are those barriers, if they exist, that will limit us? Those are the things that I'm still interested in hearing more about.
What
That is similar.
a lovely segue. Sorry, go ahead, Jessica.
I had a very similar thought, but I was curious with at least a third of students and the majority of districts are labeled as unemployed. So they choose not to go to 2-year, 4-year or technical college. What types of jobs they're taking after high school, and how are those aligned to, similar to Latricia's point, of the community values and the family values of what those things are? But that was something that stood out to me as well.
So let's learn about it. That's what's coming next. So I'm going to turn it over to John. John's going to talk to us about kind of some of the players that are here, and then we're going to dive into exactly what you're talking about. Like, what do we know about this community? What do we know about their industry? And what is driving some of these numbers? And that's going to take us up to lunch. I'm going to apologize now if we run a few minutes over, but there's a chunk of this that I want us to make sure we get through before lunch. So John, take it away.
You bet. All right. So, the first thing I want to say before we dive into our little lookbook here is I do not expect anybody on this call to memorize all of these faces. In fact, many of these faces you may or may never even see based upon how often they visit us or they're with our team. The other thing I will say is that this list of faces will grow as because we don't have principals on here. We don't have our teachers on here. So, but this is just a quick insight, and I'm going to go over it really quickly. You have this here if you want to go back over and look. I'm not going to read slides to you, but I just want to do quick introductions. And I do hope you get to meet some of these people because these are the change makers that made our work possible. The first is Evan Rhinesmith. Evan works for the Walton Personal Philanthropy Group, and he oversees all of WPPG's work across the state of Missouri. There's also somebody that oversees it across the state of Arkansas and a different person in Tennessee. So there's the family money has people that are positioned around the state. Interesting fact about Evan is that he previously worked at St. Louis University. He lives here in St. Louis, so he's very, very dedicated. He has children that attend schools in the city, so he's very dedicated to this cause. And this project is 25% of his portfolio. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see him popping in and out. Kara Esslinger is a brand new state commissioner. So she's the head of DESE here in the state of Missouri. She just took over last month. She and Evan happen to be friends. They know each other well. Carla is also not from Phelps County, but not too far away from Phelps County. She's familiar. She knows what's going on with this project. I have yet to meet her personally, but everything I'm hearing secondhand has all been very positive, and she's familiar with TNTP, which is great. Working under her is Travis Plume. We meet with him every 6 to 8 weeks, and we work with him to think about how we're going to scale this work. He works right underneath Carla. Who we work the most with, though, is Heather Knight. She is the state director of literacy. She lives in Jefferson City, which is the state capital, smack dab in the middle of the state. Heather and I have become, I'd say, close friends in the past 6 to 8 months. She did not know who TNTP's work was previously, and I just kept beating down her door, sitting outside her office until she got sick of us. But she's somebody really great to have on our side. And she's also somebody we meet with every 6 to 8 weeks to talk about how we can grow this program at scale. And working under her is Cassandra Beatty. We couldn't find a picture of her, but you probably won't see Cassandra too often. She kind of works in the background, but she is another fan of TNTP's work. Dr. Kania Ghosh is somebody that Tricia will be working with. She's the chair for the Department of Education at Missouri S&T. Missouri S&T does not have a school of education. They have a Department of Education. I flattered her when I asked her about the school of ed, and she's like, oh, no, let's back up. We don't have a school of ed. We just have a little department. But she is well-researched and well-versed in early literacy, and she is really excited about this work. Aaron Zales was previously the superintendent to Rolla Public Schools and now works as the director overseeing the South Central RPDC. That, if you remember, that's the line of work that Kim will be working with because we have a couple coaches, literacy coaches that are in his department, and they want some PD. And then we have 4 of our superintendents here. You'll see Tim, Tracy, and Dr. Dare. All have been very involved. Not pictured here is Bob. I have to commend our 5 superintendents. Every time I email them, they get back with me within 24 hours. They are super responsive, and they are very, very excited about this work. And then you'll see here our Dent Phelps leaders. Dent Phelps has been, I don't know, I know we're not supposed to play favorites, but they're the most excited. They brought the most people to the table. They are just so excited for this level of support that they know that they can't have. The mailman is from a different district. So that's in the Missouri's boot heel. If you look at the state, there's this little part that looks like a boot. So they're not involved in the program yet. However, they are eagerly waiting for us to grow to a different region, and the boot heel is hoping we'll come down there. And then last but not least, these are the catalysts. This is the folks at the Phelps County Community Foundation. I'm not going to steal Kim and Monica's thunder when we talk about, you're going to get to meet them in August when we're all down on the ground, but they have some special things planned for us. So you're going to get to meet them, and they have just been the kindest, most gracious, excited people that I have met in this work. And I'm going to kick it to Kim to talk a little bit about some of those major players you're asking about for the employers in and around Phelps County.
I love that this is where everyone's mind went. Like what is happening? What is the industry? What is the future for the children here? And so this comes from Phelps County and their kind of Chamber of Commerce area. these are the major employers. So some of them are, kind of more obvious by the name, but something that really stuck out to me as I started researching each of these businesses is technology plays a huge role in local industry. So Brewer Science is making a specialty coating that goes over the chips that are in our cell phones. Was developed by a local family, and this has grown into their business. ETS Wound Care, like this is not Band-Aids. They are making innovative tissue. Like they are like scientifically designing tissue for advanced wound care. Hartman Pack and Perform, it's not an egg company, but is the company that makes egg crates and packaging for eggs. As you see Missouri S&T, what I'm learning is the presence of Missouri S&T in this community is a huge driver of the industry. Folks are coming, they are getting advanced degrees in science and technology, and they are staying. Or they are staying and they are building family businesses that require for a lot of their workforce an advanced technical degree. So when we go back to, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about this, we're going to talk about it after lunch of like, what are the conceptions that we have about rural communities and how is what we're learning upending this? This is a very scientifically driven community. Now, that does not say that all jobs require advanced technology degrees, but this is a well-educated community in Phelps County. Some of the other things that you see, so like the US Geological Society has a big hub there that requires an advanced degree. Lots of Forest Service land. Fort Leonard is an Army training facility. So they do a lot of training for advanced certifications in the Army. Like, yes, they make skin, Monica, you're right. Like they make skin. The Tacony, like they're doing like marketing of like home products, like flooring and like not just manufacturing plants, but people who are doing, more highlight like technologically advanced fields. Phelps Health is a big area hospital that's a big employer. Cohen Woodworking is making like, think like hospital front desk, hotel front desk. It's that level of construction. So we're going to send some links in the post work so you can, if you're curious and you want to dig more into this, but these are the major employers in Phelps County. Some of these manufacturers come with blue collar manufacturing jobs, but there is a significant amount of jobs that require an advanced degree. Here's a breakdown. So the Phelps Community Foundation, and John, has talked about them quite a bit. We're going to continue talking about them as their partners in this work. So they create an impact report. I'm sending you that impact report as post work. And I encourage you to skim the whole thing. I've really just pulled out some bits and pieces that I felt like were relevant to our work for today. But this really gives you the breakdown of the income of folks in Phelps County. So a somewhat even split across these three income levels. So it is not all low-income folks in this area. And then we've been talking a lot about like demographics, like big picture demographics. And this is so far the closest thing that I can find to a racial demographic breakdown of the county. I'm not done looking, but they tend to, in Phelps County, produce a lot more by age than they do by race. Which like is a different conversation we can have at a different time about the breakdown of age in Phelps County. But this is from their Bureau of Labor statistics, income, and the demographics of folks that are working in Phelps County. Their impact report, they think of it as like, what are their blue ribbons? What are they really proud of? What are their red flags? What are things that are big problems? And what are some things that they are keeping an eye on that are starting to become a problem? But this one was particularly relevant as they talk about, really affordable cost of living. Yet they're keeping an eye on housing affordability that's starting to become a problem in Phelps County for all residents. While they already recognize that there's a wage disparity issue that's happening in Phelps County. Part of their impact report is about early childhood. Early childhood really meaning like pre-K and like birth to 3. So it's not as focused on K-12 and like really where we'll spend our time. I think this sets a good foundation for, where things are in Phelps County. Access to childcare is a challenge. There's kind of like this like pro and con to like the Office of Childhood being kind of rolled up under the state. And what that means is like there's infrastructure support, but also, less local control around it and like the needs of their rural community. Something that I'll name before I turn this back over to John as we kind of wrap up our pre-lunch portion. When we think about an impact report, this is self-reported data. So these are the things that Phelps County are saying, these are things we recognize as our strengths. These are things that we recognize as our red flags and our areas for growth. There are also things that we bring to the table and things that we're going to see differently than locals are. And so I've asked John to share a little bit about, from his travels in this state, what are some things as a project team that we should have on our, on our radar from kind of like John's perspective, what he's noticed, and maybe potentially like, a TNTP orientation.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. So again, these are my observations and the things that when I'm driving in and around Phelps County have wowed me and I've been so impressed by, and things that have really given me pause. So I say that because these are my opinions. These are not all based on facts, but I just wanted to give you an idea. Like one of the things being, around Missouri S&T, it is an school of engineering, all kinds of engineering, and people talk about Missouri S&T and they're very proud of that school. I can tell you, even as far as going up to Kansas City and even in some other states, I've heard people say, oh, you're from Missouri, that Missouri S&T, that engineering school is there. So like the students that go there get recruited all over. I have a friend who went there and he designs ropes, literally designs ropes for a living that are used in like caves and in mining. I didn't even know that was a job, but yes, it's kind of engineering job. So people are very, very proud of the school. The stakeholders that I previewed for you just recently, when we talk about our work and they talk about coming to Phelps County, they're so excited. The local newspaper wants to do an article about all of us coming and the work we're going to be doing. So they're trying to put together a press release. So I just met with them the other day to talk about like things that they can include and what Walton will and will not let them include. And they're very, very proud of their community, and they really want to rewrite the narrative that having you can be in Phelps County and have a very rich, fulfilling life. You don't have to leave, you can stay here, and there's lots to be able to do and to see. And driving around, I would say in Kansas City and St. Louis are very blue bubbles. Like that's a fact. They're blue cities, whereas the rest of the state is very red. That's not a good thing, not a bad thing, regardless of your political view. That is just a fact. That's the way it is. And that's something that I think is important for you to know. Also driving around Phelps County and driving to Phelps County, I have seen Confederate flags that people still fly. So apparently there's still people fighting the Civil War. So if you're not familiar with doing work in rural America, yeah, like Latricia's laughing, she's familiar with it in Georgia, like she's not new to that. But I say these things and I say these observations for a couple reasons. The first is, as I am sharing these things with you, I expect all of us to share the great things that are happening, the things that give us pause, and the things that are challenging us at our work so that we can grow and get better, but also so that we can ensure that psychologically we are safe. And if we're experiencing things like microaggressions or we're experiencing things like unequal praise or concerns, the only way we'll grow and get better and be able to address those things head on is if when we are meeting one-on-one with our manager, or doing a skip level meeting and you're meeting with me or whoever it is that you're sharing both the good, the bad, and the ugly. Because that's the only way that we're going to be able to do our work. And that is what's most paramount, is that we are safe and we are happy and we are thriving. Anything else you would add in there, Kim, or anybody else want to add anything or have any questions? And again, this is just my experience just in the past few months. I'm sure we're going to uncover a lot more as we start working with the people.
So I'm actually gonna pause us here. I'm gonna take a break for lunch. We're gonna come back and we're gonna kind of dig into some more like misconceptions and assumptions that we make about rural communities and how we're upending that today when we come back for lunch. But thank you all for, bearing with us through the fire hose of data. And as we're starting to unpack, this great opportunity and this rich work that we're gonna get to do in Missouri. So just as a time check, so it's 1:10. I do want to give you guys the full hour